started in here. Let's get it started. Ha! Let's get it started in here. Yeah.
Let's get it started in here.
Welcome to The View from a Pew, a conversation among Christians who are out to grow their faith by asking the simple questions, the tough questions, and the stuff you really wish your pastor would talk about. Come on now, let's reason together. It's your voice we want to hear. The phone lines are open, so join the conversation. Call 855-244-0077. That's 855-244-0077. Now, here's your host, J. Michael McCoy.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is Wednesday, View from a Pew, powered by Webcast One 99.3 KTIA. And this is your, oftentimes on Wednesday, the junior co-host, kind of a sidekick, a little bit like Tonto with the Lone Ranger. But the Lone Ranger has been laid up with an upper respiratory infection for the last week. He called me yesterday on Christmas Day. I was down there with my family opening some presents, and, Tom! He could hardly talk. He sounded like death warmed over. So he said he'd go to the doctor today and try to get better, but he's been not doing well. We already had our good friend Will Rogers scheduled to come on, so Will's coming on with me today. Will's, if you haven't heard Will before, he's a very well-schooled individual and intellectual in a number of areas of discussion. He's not the one that said he never met a man he didn't like. That was the old Will Rogers. This guy has met a few that he doesn't care much for. But say hi to the audience, Will.
Glad to be back here again, Tom. Thank you so much. And Mac, if you're listening, get well soon. We'd love to hear you back on the radio.
Exactly right. So we're going to struggle along here, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to try to keep you entertained, a few things to inform you as we go along. And anyway, Dan is here. Mac always refers to him as Father Tattoo. Dan, do you want to say anything for the audience?
No, I hope they had a Merry Christmas, but other than that, I think I'm good.
That's right, day after Christmas, and we're in the house. It's a struggle just to get parked out there, guys. Did you have any trouble getting into a parking place on the street?
I managed to find one outside the studio not too far away, but there was a lot of snow up against the curb. I had to kind of struggle to get over it there.
For those of you that don't know, we do this show from downtown on the Skywalk. You have to come by and see the operation sometime. But on a day like this, where they still got the snow piled up and the ice and everything, is a bit more of a challenge than it was when it was 70 degrees out and we just kind of strolled in from anywhere.
You mean last week?
Yeah, not long ago. I want to kick this off. And Dan, give me some... When's our first break? I don't want to mess this up as bad as I did when I had Doug on here without Mac. When's our first break?
Our first break's going to be about 18 minutes after.
18 after. Okay, I'm going to keep an eye on that because
I'll try to get you a
Doug
light
Gross
up.
on here a few weeks ago without Mac. I messed up a few of the break points, so I'm going to try to keep that in mind a little bit better. I want to start this off, Will, with you covering what apparently is the looming catastrophe to befall Western man in our lifetime, and that's the what they refer to as the fiscal cliff. It even went so far as to cause our anointed one to leave his Hawaiian vacation a little bit early. I don't know if you heard that or not.
I did, and Tom, if I'll say this right now, myself, I've never sent an email or a letter to the White House ever before until about 2 weeks ago.
No.
I submitted an email online through the White House website and encouraged President Obama to stay in Washington, D.C. Through the Christmas holiday, and that if needed, he should stay at the White House or in negotiations with the House leadership on Christmas Eve and on Christmas Day to avert the fiscal cliff, or going over the fiscal cliff, and actually sent that to President Obama. After I'd mentioned that to a couple of my friends, they asked me to send the link to the White House website as well, or to their email. because they wanted to reiterate the same thing.
Well, you're a man of extraordinary influence, and though he did go to Hawaii, I'm sure the fact that you sent him that very cogent email urging him to get his nose back to the grindstone was what caused him to cut the vacation short. I think he had planned for a little over 2-week respite over there in the confines of Hawaii, all on the taxpayer's nickel. But he's cutting it short. Now, Michelle and the girls are staying there at as I understand, very high price to us American taxpayers. But he actually cut it short unless he can go in there and weave his dark magic powers over the forces of Boehner and the other crew. He could go back to Hawaii before they come home. Do a little more golfing. He was the most golf president in the first term we've ever seen. You know, they talked about Eisenhower and other people golfing. Man played over 100 rounds of golf in his first term.
Well, normally I'd say he has his priorities right, and but as the leader of the free world, and for the problems that this man's experienced during his first term in office, I think he's played at least 1 or 2 rounds too many this last 4 years.
Well, we could argue both ways that perhaps he needs to play even more golf, because I have a feeling like the longer he stays in office with his nose to the grindstone with his mission, the worse we all are.
You're absolutely right.
I think perhaps more vacations, more golf outings might actually be in our best interest.
Yeah, it's a good thing he's got his work ethic.
You think that, Dan?
I think this work ethic's great for President Obama. I would encourage him to go back and not worry about it. Go right back to Hawaii and pay attention to his daughters and be a good father, because that's where he shines.
I guess, gentlemen, the problem I must have is that I still expect a president to lead at some point, and I'm still waiting for the president to do that. And
but
so
do you want him to lead? I mean, really?
You know, I guess I'm still have this one last shred of, you know, hope for the possibility that this man could actually, you know, pull it together and do the right thing.
There's your problem. He's an optimist. He's just an optimist. That's his problem.
Well, I think Dan's a little bit of an optimist. Barack Obama came into office, guys, with the thinnest resume of any president in our nation's history.
Agreed.
And he has done nothing to show that he has been able to grow in the office. The press, as much as they try to cover up for him the latest debacle in Libya, over there, just another manifestation of the guy's incompetence in every realm. Now, he's an ideologue. He absolutely wants to remake America, as he had a Freudian slip one day and said in the press he wants to remake America. But that is not in the image of what the founders had in mind. The image that I believe that he has mirrors a socialist European model, because America is inherently unfair. Now, the problem that we have with this fiscal cliff, guys, is that we are now back up to almost where we were in revenues into the U.S. Treasury prior to the crash of 2008. And yet we are still running over $1 trillion annual deficit. Now, if Obama has his way, and he seems not to want to do what he suggested last year he would be willing to do, what he suggested last year was to take out some of the deductions and adjust the tax rate to the point that we could raise as much revenue. Now he denies that that's acceptable. He now wants taxes raised on anybody making over $200,000. And has shown very little willingness, even after Boehner said, well, we could tax the people making $1 million. No. He wants it his way. If he had it his way, guys, the additional revenue generated, even on a static model, is under $100 billion on an annual basis. And I think the last month that I saw for October, we had a $120 billion budget deficit. So the revenue that would be generated, now when I say static model, ladies and gentlemen, I'm saying that if you assume that even though you are raising taxes on people, they will still work as hard and be as industrious as they would have been on the lower tax level, which is not right. A dynamic model is more to the point. But even if you take the static model that the liberals love to take, they assume every thing is going to continue as if the taxes had not been raised, we would be generating additional revenue, which would carry us for less than about 3 weeks worth of our deficit. The problem is not the revenue side. It is clearly the expense side. Since Barack Obama's had his way with this economy, we have grown the federal government, the size of the bureaucracy that sits and continues to choke us all out, by about a third. It's a third bigger than it was under when President Slick Willie Clinton left office. We had a government that was 2/3 the size of what it is today. And it is the expansion of government and the expansion of things like food stamps. We've gone up to almost 48 million people, citizens in this country, that are now on food stamps. We've seen that increase by 50% since Barack Obama came in. We have seen the disabilities, people getting on Medicaid, expand. Over 1,000 per week have gone into that. They've loosened up the confines. The point was they wanted to try to make an increasing number of Americans dependent upon the federal government. And by that dependency, it allows the federal government to grow and grow without check. And when it comes to the ballot box, we just saw this last time around, that if you can increase the dependency enough, the people, Bill O'Reilly said, people want stuff. Well, this kind of dependency and this growth in our federal government is the biggest danger that I think we've seen in this republic since it was initiated over 200 years ago. What do you say, Will?
Well, Tom, I mean, certainly probably the greatest threat to the United States, short of perhaps some terrorist group or a rogue state getting a hold of a nuclear weapon and detonating it on U.S. soil, is our budget deficit. And again, this is largely in part to the last two administrations have grown that debt tremendously. Barack Obama, obviously, I always tell my friends that voted for him, well, if you like George Bush, you must really love Barack Obama. And they go, what? And I'm like, well, Barack Obama is George Bush on steroids. Yeah. In the sense that deficit spending did start under George Bush in a significant way, but President Obama has just taken it and reinvented it, and to an extent we describe it as an art. That being said, right now I want to talk to people, and those listening out there, I want you to understand what's going to happen between now and the end of the year, and it's going to be absolutely nothing. Mm-hmm. There's nothing going to be done on the fiscal.
So we go into sequestration.
We will go into sequestration.
Which you want to explain that to the listeners? What sequestration?
Essentially what we're going to see is a 10% across the board cut in all spending at the federal level. We're going to see all discretionary spending. There's two types of spending that goes on in the government: discretionary, non-discretionary funding or spending. And discretionary is things that aren't automatically built in, such as Social Security, Medicare, prescription Part D, and eventually will be Obamacare as well. Those entitlement programs, which we describe them, those are non-discretionary. Discretionary spending covers the military, Department of Education, transportation, various other programs that we have in our federal government. All those agencies will take a 10% hit to their budgets.
Well, now half the spending cuts came from that, and the other half, if I remember, it came from the military cuts. They were focused
Correct.
Just on military cuts.
Yes, defense spending will actually have a significant cut as well.
Now, and that's not all bad, because I think maybe an across-the-board whack at our federal spending is not a bad idea. I think it's disproportionately falling on the military. But, ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about the debt, we always throw out the 15 and then the 16 trillion in the national budget debt that we have burdening us. And part of the problem here is that right now we have interest rates that are almost historically low in this country. They are being held down artificially by the Federal Reserve. And if and when, and it's a when, the interest rates start to go up, the borrowed money starts to quickly cost us more, and you can see a point, even with this much borrowed money, where our whole budget becomes taken up by servicing the national debt. And then you have to spend more and more and more and borrow more and more and more. And when it doesn't stop at the 16 trillion, guys, because then you start adding in state and local governments' debt, and then you take in the anywhere from 60 to 70 trillion dollars in underfunded entitlements, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and now Obamacare. We're talking round numbers at about 100 trillion. And when we get back from break, we're going to explore that a little bit more. 100 trillion, what does it really mean? This is Tom Coates sitting in for Mac at Webcast One Live.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Drug and alcohol addiction slowly steals a person's identity, tearing away pieces of their life little by little until one day it seems like the hope of a happy future is gone and there's no chance of getting it back. Here at St. Gregory Retreat Centers, we can assure you that there is hope. Our unique approach to recovery begins with the understanding that the dysfunction and damage caused by addiction can be overcome, not just dealt with. Don't let another day go by. Call St. Gregory today.
The dawn of a new era begins. From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Tom Coates coming back to you. I'm your temporary substitute host on View from a Pew today, powered by Webcast One 99.3 KTIA, and my host today is Will Rogers. Will is, again, an expert in a number of areas, but what we were talking to you about before the break happened to be the area of the national debt, sequestration, the fiscal cliff. There's a number of aspects here. And I was just going to draw an analogy for you. I just had, before we went on break, I was talking about the $16 trillion in the budget debt. I was talking about local and state governments' debt and another $60 to $70 trillion in underfunded entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and now Obamacare. All those things wrapped into one are about $100 trillion. And I have when I do my presentation in front of an audience, high school kids or college or a fraternal organization or whatever, one of my illustrations is to take them to show them visually what $1 million looks like, and then to show them on paper with, what $1 billion looks like with $100 bills, and then we roll into what $1 trillion looks like, and it's an incredible leap, and it visually, I think captures some attention. Because these numbers, when you throw them out over the airwaves like this, doesn't seem to mean much. A million, billion, trillion, people can't get a hold, they can't get their arms around it. So I like to show them visually. What this means, though, is with the nation, a little over 300 million people that we have today, the United States of America, if you calculate that back into that 100 trillion, we are talking about close to $330,000 for every man, woman, and child. That's what we're talking about. Now, you think about that. You're a family of 4. How many kids do you have, Will?
We have one daughter.
Have one daughter. So there's 3 of you in the family, you, your wife, and your daughter. And so right now, you owe your bill right now, if you could write a check, is about $1 million. You think that perhaps you could do that maybe before the end of the day?
I would love to be able to write that check.
Well, it is staggering, and there's no end in sight. And even if these talks culminate in some kind of a compromise and agreement, although it seems like it's all one way, Barack Obama wants it all his way, and that's it. There's really no addressing of the issue that I just talked to you about. Now, the sequestration, the thing that bothers me most about sequestration would be a significant jumping off a cliff on a cut with the military. And that's the only thing really that bothers me about the fact that most people would see their taxes go up if you're paying taxes, and I think the majority of people that aren't paying taxes were Obama supporters back in the November election. Many of those people would see themselves revisited back on the tax rolls because as much as they like to vilify George W. Bush, it was his tax cuts many years ago that took many of those people off the tax rolls. They went from paying taxes to not paying income taxes, and then they didn't care how much tax rates went up. But they will start to care now when they go back onto the tax rolls, even if it's for a little while. The issue that I also see happening here is the one that you've come on to talk about today, and we're going to make a segue from the sequestration and the cutting in the military and our defense over to what kind of an impact this could have as we try to deal with an increasingly dangerous Middle East situation. We saw it on display in Libya. We are about to see it on display in Syria. We've seen it on display in Egypt. The things that this administration was quite proud of have turned out just like it did under Jimmy Carter when we turned the Shah out and we let the democratic process take its toll, and we got what has arguably been the most dangerous group of thugs in the Middle East with Iran, as we could have hoped to have seen. And now we have them popping up all over. Tell us your take on this, Will. Let's talk about this issue a little bit.
I mean, I'll start with with my own experience being in the military. And while it wasn't the same as Army Brad, who's often here as well in the studio, we both shared some time in the military, and we both could cite examples of where there's been fraud, waste, and abuse in the military. But overall, the strength of our country and the security of our country, as well as that of our allies, has been to what has resulted from the strong defense spending that we've have done in the United States, as well as our neighbors. I mean, we supply our allies with the security that they won't have to have a standing military themselves or pursue nuclear weapons programs, such as Canada. Canada doesn't spend hardly anything on defense, and that's a good thing. And they're great neighbors. We do a lot of business with them. But we've said to them, look, you don't need to worry about a military. We'll take care of you if something happens. Mexico.
We can extend it to Europe, Japan. I mean, after World War II, we said you cannot spend too much on your military. We'll take care of you. So we've pretty much been the policemen of the world, haven't we, Will?
Yes, we have. That being said, it is a great concern to me, especially with this president, how far we cut our military right now. Because we have seen this in the past where we've scaled back the strength of our military, the standing number of troops, the types of investment in new technology and new equipment.
Nuclear warheads,
other various things where we've actually scaled back too far and left ourselves exposed or vulnerable. And we actually do end up paying for it when we do actually have to go back and continue military operations. We've seen it not so recently, but in the past. I always use a good example of Operation Task Force. I think it was Task Force Smith. That was back in the Korean War. We went into Korea, and we ended up having some significant casualties. And part of the reason is our troops hadn't been trained properly. They just hadn't had the types of military training and the types of resources that they needed. And then we ended up spending a lot of money to catch up and be able to take on the North Koreans and also engage partly the Chinese as well. Now, where we're at today is there's a lot of problems in the world. And we need to really kind of take a look at those and examine them and make sure that we understand those threats and concerns. And I guess probably to myself right now, the greatest threat or concern really is in the area of the Middle East, but more specifically Iran. And for those folks, who don't understand it, I just want to make sure you do understand what Iran is and why it's of concern. And I guess the first thing I would say is, first of all, most people think of, other countries around the world. They don't understand the politics of them. And Iran is an Islamo-fascist state. And for those of you who don't know that, it's a theocracy or a totalitarian state with its political ideology placed, with the belief in radical Islamic beliefs. So these people there, they are ruled by a government. They have a government, but that government really serves at the whim or the function of the ayatollahs. And these are the people that are the Islamic leaders. And they are, again, very radical in their beliefs. They are what we would consider to be, they exclude women and other people from their society in such a way that they consider them second-class citizens. They disenfranchise them. They have no rights, as well as they go out of their way to, again, also sponsor other organizations, and some of those organizations are involved in terrorist activities. So we need to concern ourselves with Iran primarily at this point because of their nuclear weapons program that they've been pursuing.
Well, and this administration, I know under Bush, we can disparage him, rightfully so, on some of his movements to expand Medicare and to spend more money than he should have. But from when it came to military issues, and he was trained as a fighter pilot, he had some good advisors. He took the military and the security issues very seriously. It was a top priority at the start of every day. We find out that Barack Obama skips most of his briefings, doesn't take it very seriously, has a much different attitude towards the military. I think he has the traditional liberal attitude towards the military, which under Jimmy Carter resulted in draconian cuts in the military. Under Bill Clinton, that's the only reason that Bill Clinton ran a balanced budget for a short period of time, was a dramatic cuts to the military. Both of those had to be addressed. When Reagan came in after Carter, he had to dramatically increase spending to make up for some of the deficit spending that had gone on under Carter. Same thing with W. Bush. He had to come in and he had to make up territory because Clinton had, just like traditional liberals, wanted, the only place they ever want to cut is military spending. They want to spend more money on every other godforsaken program that you can shake a stick at, but when it comes to military, they're happy to cut there. I think that's what we're now going to see, especially in the second term with Barack Obama. Significant draconian cuts in military, and how will that impact our ability to deal with this Iranian threat over there?
Well, I mean, we certainly look at Iran right now. They have been pursuing nuclear weapons, enriching nuclear materials so that they can get enough material to create not just one, but several nuclear weapons. And whether these weapons would be carried in a suitcase or they'd be delivered by missile, they've been pursuing this for a long time. Now, the background is, Iran's been chasing after a nuclear weapon for about the last 40 to 50 years.
Yes.
The Shah of Iran actually had started the program nearly 50 years ago.
Is that right?
Now, there's been times that they have had that program going full steam, and then there's some times that they've mothballed it. Actually, when the Ayatollah Khomeini seized control from the Shah, overthrew the Shah back in the late 70s, what you actually saw was that he shut down that program.
He shut it down
He
for a
shut it
period of
down
time.
for a couple of different reasons. One that they claim was for religious or reasons that would not be seen as a negative thing. That it was
PR.
They didn't want to be seen as pursuing a nuclear weapons program at the time.
Better public relations.
The other thing was, though, and more probably the more real part of that would have been he didn't want to see the weapons fall in the hands of the wrong people.
Mm-hmm.
And that meant his political opponents, because there were a lot of political opponents. There were still some factions that they hadn't been able to stamp out, and that nuclear weapon could have fallen in the hands of his enemies.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the reasons why he actually shut it down for a while. But now I got to that the current administration, the current president Ahmed Ahmadinejad, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad.
You're doing very well with that.
He is actually pursuing this very aggressively, and we've seen in the last 10 years now this gentleman ramp up the centrifuges tremendously. They're trying to enrich enough uranium or enough fissile material to create multiple weapons. They actually had earlier this year kind of slowed down that program a little bit, but since the magnificent leader here has gained a second term, they have actually gone back to operating a 24/7.
Yep.
On their
Now,
centrifuges.
we have some people say this is not a big deal because we've had nuclear enemies in the past, the Russians, and I was reading an article, and you and I are both members of the Cigar Club. The Cigar Aficionado revisited the nuclear missile crisis we had with Russia and Cuba back in '62, and the stare down we had with them. The difference was Castro wanted the Russians to go ahead and do a preemptive nuclear strike on us, and Khrushchev got so alarmed that he went ahead and decided to pull out those missiles. And so it was the idea that they did not want to destroy themselves. And
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Drug and alcohol addiction slowly steals a person's identity, tearing away pieces of their life little by little until one day it seems like the hope of a happy future is gone and there's no chance of getting it back. Here at St. Gregory Retreat Centers, we can assure you that there is hope. Our unique approach to recovery begins with the understanding that the dysfunction and damage caused by addiction can be overcome, not just dealt with. Don't let another day go by. Call St. Gregory today.
The dawn of a new era begins. From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
if you sit in the back pew or the front pew. It's your voice we want to hear. The phone lines are open, so call 855-244-0077. Now, here's J. Michael McCoy.
No, sir, not J. Michael McCoy today. This is View from a Pew, powered by Webcast One Live, 99.3 KTIA. But no Mac today. Mac is homesick. This is your substitute host, Tom Coates, coming to you on a Wednesday with my guest, Will Rogers. And Will, the point I was making before we got cut off on the last break was that a nuclear-armed China or Russia or some of these other places is far different than a nuclear-powered Iran. Again, Khrushchev stopped the missile crisis because Castro was jumping up and down saying use them, and he thought, this guy's crazy. We don't want anything to do with this. So he shut part of that that eyeball to eyeball. He read John F. Kennedy as a weak man. I think perhaps he had some validity. He was a hardened World War II guy, and he read Kennedy as a kid, and he could push him around, and he was testing him out. But when Castro wanted him to go ahead and use those things, oh no. And as you pointed out at the break, there was reason that Russia wanted up on a parity with us, especially the way World War II ended, with two of them dropped on Japan to end the war. You'd want one too.
Yeah, well, Russia suffered almost 20 million lives were lost in Russia.
And I would point out the majority of those were at the hands of Stalin, rather than anybody else.
This is during World War II.
I know, but Stalin was responsible for most of the millions of deaths that occurred during that point. But let's not get too far distracted. I was trying to make a point. Right. We want to come back to your point, Will. And your point was that a nuclear-armed Iran sets up a whole different theater over in the Middle East. Tell us about that.
Well, right now, 10 years ago is a good example to start with. You had Iran still with the nuclear weapons program, not necessarily pursuing it all that actively. And then you also look at Israel, which allegedly has a nuclear weapon of some type. We don't know what it is. They don't discuss it that much.
How many how many warheads do you think they have?
You know what? I
know you've looked into this a little. What's your guess?
There's everything from 1 up to 50. Let's just put it that way. Nobody really has that intelligence that I'm aware of.
But it's been presumed for many years that Israel is a nuclear power at this point.
Absolutely. Now, the problem now is that because Iran has so vigorously pursued a nuclear weapons capability, it's created a situation where all of its neighbors now want to have a nuclear weapon as well because they don't want to get pushed around in the Middle East. And that's really what it's going to do, is it's going to embolden Iran to even be a continued or a larger bad actor, not just within its area, but around the world. And that's where you look at North Korea as a good example of this. What's happened since we tried to shut down their program with the UN inspections and Hans Blix and back in Bill Clinton's administration. We now see North Korea with a nuclear weapon and also shooting missiles over the Sea of Japan. And they continue to be a bad actor. And Iran likes to export its bad acting. They're even not just in the Middle East, but they buddy up with Hugo Chavez and other people that are around the world that are against the United States and our interests. And that's why we look at Iran. The real threat is that they would try to do something to our Israel, or that they would give their weaponry to groups that would be interested in detonating that on U.S. soil.
In our own hemisphere, that's right. Which was the problem going back to 1962 with the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Russians bringing their nuclear-armed missiles into the island of Cuba, 90 miles off our shore. That was a direct threat. This would be another direct threat. The Venezuelans, other interests that don't like us, might very well pick up on this. And even if they don't bring it into our hemisphere, we have one solid ally in the Middle East, and that is the nation of Israel. They've stood by us in spite of, some of our better efforts to turn our backs on them, and I think we're going to see that. And we've got some people coming into some positions of power that might very well accelerate the turning of our backs on the nation of Israel. Do you want to give us a little bit of a preview of some of these names that are coming onto the scene?
Well, Tom, right now, you see the newest Secretary of State nominee, or that just was last week nominated or placed in nomination by President Clinton, was Senator John Kerry. Now, I don't think that a lot of people want to beat up Senator Kerry too badly. I'm not going to say.
I do.
Well, let me put it this way: people in the United States Senate tend to be it's kind of the part of the
old boys club.
The boys club. They're not going to go after one another too much, but there are some concerns that Senator Kerry we have about him as the Secretary of State nominee. I think those questions will be asked, but in a very polite way and in a way that will eventually get around to him being confirmed by the United States Senate.
That's almost a foregone conclusion that when they appoint one of their own to these positions, they get they get the guy in. And in spite of all, the guys that have the biggest problem with him are some of the ones that served with him. When he ran for president, they came out and what did they call the group? The group that came
Swift Boat Veterans.
The Swift Boat Veterans, and they came out and they wanted to show the real John Kerry.
Well, and those certainly going to be some questions.
In a tight election, that might have been the difference.
It might have been, actually. Now, John Kerry obviously is the one name that's been placed in a nomination. There's another one that's being floated around right now for Secretary of Defense.
Okay.
And that is the former senator from Nebraska,
Chuck
Hagel. Senator Hagel is a greater concern, especially to Israel and people that are interested in the security and prosperity of Israel.
All right. Tell us about both of their positions, if you could.
Well, I'm gonna start with Senator Hagel, and I really want to. There's a lot of things you can go online and read about. Right now, there's a couple of great articles that have been posted in the last week on the Jerusalem Post that discuss this in further detail. But there's right now the liberal apologetic, people trying to apologize or make excuses for Senator Hagel's positions. The reality is that he has not been the most pro-Israel senator in the United States Senate, and since then has made a lot of comments that would be deemed anti-Israel.
Perhaps one of the most anti-Jewish senators to serve in recent times, then.
I would absolutely agree with that. Now, he was one of 4 senators a few years ago that did not sign on to, out of the entire U.S. Senate, one of 4 that didn't sign on to to support Israel on a particular issue dealing with their security. Again, he has also said that the Israeli lobby in Washington, D.C. is too powerful and that the senators kowtow to them too much, or that the president and Congress kowtows to this Israeli lobby too much. I mean, there's a number of instances where he's said and voted in ways that would lead a person to conclude that he will not support Israel as the Secretary of Defense.
All right. Given that scenario, and I presume that perhaps in a lesser strident fashion, but you must feel like John Kerry is no friend of Israel either.
I'm not going to go as far as painting him to be in the same caliber of Chuck Hagel as anti-Israel, but I'm not. Let's put it this way: I'm not going to declare him to be the greatest ally. Mm-hmm. Let's just put it that way.
And in a time, we just laid out the scenario, ladies and gentlemen, that this is a troubling time. This is a dangerous time for the Middle East and really for the entire world, given the and for the Christians out there. You know that many of us look at the end time scenario, and we know that it comes back around to the Middle East, to the nation of Israel. We don't have a lot of time before this last break, but I do want to allow you to talk a little bit more about the nation of Israel and the threats that they are now under, and how these changing personnel of Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of State may have an impact on this.
This is really important, and I'll just say this. It's really troubling to me that this president has nominated these people at this time. And what message does it send to Israel? Mm-hmm. And what message does it send to its enemies?
Exactly right. And again, we're going to come back for our last break, and I want to try to let our guest answer a few of those questions, and perhaps what he would do if he were sitting in the position to call some of the shots, not only from this country's standpoint, but from the nation of Israel. Now, this is Tom Coates. I'm sitting in for J. Michael McCoy. View from a Pew, 99.3 K.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Drug and alcohol addiction slowly steals a person's identity, tearing away pieces of their life little by little until one day it seems like the hope of a happy future is gone and there's no chance of getting it back. Here at St. Gregory Retreat Centers, we can assure you that there is hope. Our unique approach to recovery begins with the understanding that the dysfunction and damage caused by addiction can be overcome, not just dealt with. Don't let another day go by. Call St. Gregory today.
The dawn of a new era begins. From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
We're the ones in the pew, not pulpit. Come on now, let's reason together. The phone lines are open, so call 855-244-0077. Now, here's J. Michael McCoy.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're coming back for our last segment. This is Tom Coates coming to you from Webcast One Live, 99.3. View from a pew. Mac's not in today, but I'm doing my best to sub in for him. And our guest today is Will Rogers. We've been discussing in the latter part primarily the Mideast situation, the nuclear armaments that are being gathered in hurriedly now by Iran, and how this may impact. We talked a little bit about the likely candidates for Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, Hagel and Kerry, and how they are not particularly good friends of the nation of Israel. We'll talk to us a little bit about the situation that Israel finds itself in, and what are its choices today.
Well, right now, I guess, to really state the obvious, Israel will act in its own best interest. Whether the United States or the UN or anyone else gives it the go-ahead or green light to do so. And it's been said in the past, well, there's this amount of time or window that before it'll be too late to stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. And, currently right now, from all intelligence, the general number that keeps getting bandied around is about 6 months from now, Iran will be past the point of no return in terms of a nuclear weapon.
Which means it gets to the point that North Korea is now, where you really can't take any direct action on North Korea without the blowback being significant. I heard a conversation after they left office, Dick Cheney was having, and some people really dislike Dick Cheney. I don't think even his greatest detractors could argue that he was a stupid guy or he wasn't a well-informed man. He was telling the interviewer that this discussion was very active in the latter days of the George W. Bush administration, that he personally voted to go ahead and take military action against Iran, to go ahead and resolve the situation then. But he said, I was in the minority, and the majority on the cabinet did not want to pursue that. They wanted to leave it to the successor. I think most people presumed at that point that it would not be 4 years, 5 years after the fact, and the issue was still not dealt with, and it was still, as you say, maybe a handful of months away from the go or no-go point. I know that the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who is a very sharp guy and a guy I've listened to different times and have a lot of respect for, was hoping to get a more friendly administration. I think if anybody was cheering on Mitt Romney, it was Netanyahu. Unfortunately, just like with many of the rest of us, that cheering went for naught, and he's got to deal with another 4 years of Barack Obama, who is not, at this point, can be considered a friend of Israel. But given that scenario, let's say we get to a point and Israel calls up one day and they say, Barry, we're going to have to go. We're going to have to go. We're to the point. Our intelligence says we got to go. We're firing off. We're going to do what? And are you going to back us up, or what's your role going to be? What happens?
Well, I think ultimately what the president's going to have to do is he's going to have to be both supportive publicly and behind the scenes as well. I mean, at this point, Israel's going to act in its own best interest, like I said earlier. They're going to attack Iran strategically. They're not going to roll in an invasive force, going across the desert or anything like that. They're going to go in with both covert military strikes, such as they'll have bombs blow up in underground bunkers that they'll have infiltrated, and they'll have strategic airstrikes as well. There won't be an occupying force or anything like that.
Will it be conventional, or will it be limited nuclear?
Who's to say what that actually could end up being? It could be limited nuclear, but my guess is it will be mainly conventional. Because
part of the problem is that these underground bunkers that you refer to have been allowed over the years since Barack Obama's come in to be dug deep, to be hardened, and they're not as easily. Remember quite a few years back now, Israel ran up there and took out the nuclear reactor that Iraq had. And that was a relatively easy strike. Everybody left their mouths open, but they took care of the situation. It's not going to be that easy.
And at the time, there was some the great gnashing and wailing and people pounding on their chests, but really nothing came out of it. And the reason why that, nobody did anything then will be the same reason why nobody does anything now, with the exception of Iran, because all of Iran's neighbors would like to see its nuclear weapons program taken out.
Yeah,
they would like to see it dealt a death blow or set back 10 years. They would like to have that because they don't want to have to deal with a nuclear-armed Iran.
Because then they dictate terms. They no longer. It was like our mutual friend Stu Bassman sent out a thing on guns. He said, you can coerce people by two ways. You can either persuade them by the power of your intellect that this course of action is best, or you can take out a gun and you can coerce them. Now, the other is the way that they would do it. It's not because they want to follow Iran. It's because if Iran is the only nuclear-armed power in the Middle East, they're the big dog, and they're going to call the shots, aren't they?
And they're actually doing that now. They're very influential in other states around the Middle East. They're trying to extend their influence into Egypt, the Palestinian Authority, Syria. You can go around the entire Middle East. Iran is trying to meddle in some way or another to spread its influence in the region. And this is, they get so much more stronger if they gain a nuclear weapon.
Does the United States need to stand behind Israel? Is Israel unable to fully deal with the situation without the backing of the United States of America?
We need to be there for Israel. And I guess the main reason why is the threat of having the bigger brother, so to speak, that will come to the aid of Israel if needed. If Israel does create goes into Iran, does what it needs to do, and then Iran or any of the neighboring Arab states decide to attack Israel, we need to make sure that we have the bigger stick in that situation, and we need to have Israel's back on that.
Well, and the straits need to stay open. We need to have the free flow of oil. We don't need to see $200 a barrel oil come in here with the blocking of the Straits of Hormuz, which is one of the tools that Iran has talked about.
Absolutely. They'll mine the Straits of Hormuz.
So, ladies and gentlemen, again, as a Christian radio station, I would implore you to not only contact your congressmen and senators and so forth in this area that we need to stand behind Israel. I think we also need to be in direct prayer. I think the power that is in heaven is far greater than anything found in Washington, D.C., even greater than the Anointed One, Barack Obama. So I want to say at the conclusion here, Will, that I've appreciated your expertise and you're willing to take your time to come into the studio today, even though we don't have Mac. We tried our best to hold up the end of the show, and I think we did a reasonably decent job. You did anyway.
Well, Tom, it's a pleasure to be here. I just encourage the listeners, if you want to find out more information, go to a website, United Against Nuclear Iran. They're a great resource for finding out additional information.
Thank you. View from a Pew, Tom Coates, saying in as your guest host. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.